This just shows how much we have strayed away from our principles and how much we are just going along with whatever the cult wants.
She was the last person in American public life that everyone agreed on. And you can tell because there's actually polling on her.
Apparently, Skynet begins with light housework.
It's Political Rehab. It's like PTI met The Daily Show and they had a baby, and it's us. This week, the Supreme Court shocks Democrats. Trump ratchets up his war on Canada. Economic D-Day, everyone turns on AI, and Meta pays up. And in our look at the midterm battlefield, did Republicans just win another week? But let's start with our rundown. Well, Matt, Trump's BFFs over at the Supreme Court really came through for him this week in an unsigned 6-3 ruling. They lifted a lower court order that had been blocking Trump's executive order meant to undermine mail voting, not voting by males. It's actually going to undermine voting by married females. But the point is, what Trump was trying to do was create all kinds of voter lists that he and the U.S. Postal Service would be able to scrutinize and decide who gets to vote by mail, who doesn't, who they're suspicious of, who they don't like, who might be a Democrat and therefore shouldn't be able to vote, that kind of thing. Constitutional stuff. You know, Matt, this is a complicated situation. This is far from the last word, but this is something that actually, unlike popular viewpoint on this, this is something that actually hits both parties. You're an active Republican campaign consultant and have probably done some of this. Republicans spent millions in 2024 getting their own voters to send in ballots by mail. What is this going to do from a Republican perspective?
Look, from a strategy standpoint, this is the worst idea we've ever had. We need those low propensity voters to show up in these tight races. That's how you win elections. But my problem goes beyond that. This is one of the most anti-conservative things I've ever seen. And the fact that we have Republicans celebrating the ruling and defending Trump on this just shows how much we have strayed away from our principles and how much we are just going along with whatever the cult wants. We do not believe government is the solution. We believe government is the problem. And we don't really want the federal government to have a list of Americans. Never mind that we've always supported states' rights. Never mind that anything the federal government touches turns to shit. And never mind we've said no when they've tried to do this with guns. Now we want them to give a list of who we voted for and run by the post office. The post office, the same organization that so mismanaged everything that it is the butt of every single joke. And I know what people are out there saying, oh, they're just going to scan barcodes and make sure they're on there. Bullshit. We know as campaign operatives every single thing about you, and now we're just giving it to the federal government.
I want to correct a couple of perceptions. One of them is that there is some kind of a partisan advantage to mail-in voting. There is not. Study after study has confirmed that what the availability of mail-in voting does is it increases turnout. It does not confer a partisan advantage either way. The other thing is that Trump's whole thing that somehow voting by mail is susceptible to fraud, vote rigging, it is absolute, complete, debunked nonsense. He's the only person who knows a thing about elections, and he doesn't know a thing about elections, who believes this. No one else. And this isn't, as you've demonstrated, even really about getting a partisan advantage. It's about creating enough chaos so that after the election, if things go against him, he can claim that there was some kind of a problem with the vote and try and put pressure on the House of Representatives to not seat newly elected Democratic members of Congress and subvert the Constitution in the election. That's all this is about.
Trump postponed the threatened tariffs on Canada, our second largest trading partner, for 3 days and announced that the U.S. and Canada had a deal subject to finalization of documents. By Friday, Canada walked away and a new 50% tariff took effect on August 22nd on roughly $20 billion of Canadian goods. Starting September 8th, Canada will impose tariffs on more than 700 American products. In what has to be the dumbest move ever, Trump has decided to start a trade war with Canada with 60 days to the election. I guess he thought prices are not nearly high enough for the people to be really suffering. So he said, let's see if we can find another way to completely cripple the economy. Matt, can you think of another bigger boneheaded move that any president has ever committed in the history of American politics?
This is part of the pattern with Trump. We saw this with the bipartisan housing bill that he refused to sign a few weeks ago. It would have been an economic win. It would have been a win on the signature issue that voters care most about, prices and affordability. It would have been something. It would have been a talking point for Republican candidates. He refused to get on board with it, and he called it a giant yawn. He's shooting himself in the foot with this. And this one is even more inexplicable, because what you're talking about is the number one trading partner for specific border states where there are the hottest Senate races, the most important races for Trump in America. Can I interest you perhaps in Maine, Michigan, Ohio, Alaska? The U.S. imports over $950 million a month in Canadian auto parts, and 60% are bound for Michigan. It's part of our automobile supply chains. Maine lobster and wild blueberries and lumber. This is stuff that's going to impact all of these key Senate races. And Trump is just taking a giant bat, or I don't know what they play in Canada. It's certainly not baseball. And he's just pounding it, across these Senate races.
It pretty much is going to cost Susan Collins the election, and it probably takes away Michigan from a win column. Alaska is already a problem. This is just one of the dumbest moves to do ever, let alone with just over 60 days until the election.
Well, I'd like to see your economic war and raise you an economic D-Day. That's what Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent announced. He's calling it an economic D-Day against Iran. And apparently the idea here is that we haven't been able to end this war militarily. Therefore, we're going to do it economically, even though economically they kind of have us by the you-know-whats. Matt, this is some rough stuff. The war is in its 6th month. Gas is about $4.10 a gallon. That's the highest this late in a year on record, unadjusted for inflation. What do you tell your Republican clients out on the campaign trail about talking about this? Like, how do they talk about this and about this economic D-Day issue?
I think most people are shocked to know that we have not been doing economic sanctions since the very beginning. I mean, that's kind of 101 stuff. You start with the economy, you start applying pressure, and then you do the military. People don't support this war. It is going to be a huge problem for Republicans. I think it is the only way we're going to get out of this without just flat out surrender. So from a political move, it's probably the only move they have. But from Republicans on the ground, as we're talking to voters, all we see is higher gas prices. We see bigger and bigger problems. We are not going to be able to put pressure on China or other countries to stop trading with Iran. We've already seen this with Canada. Canada's pushing back. Our friends are pushing back. China, other countries are not going
Our
to
former
do what
friends
Donald
like Canada.
Our former friends like Canada are not going to keep. We have no leverage here. We do not hold the cards. And I think we're seeing that, and we're feeling that on the ground. And as Republicans, it's a very complicated issue because all we see is higher gas prices. It's why the socialism issue is the only thing that comes up, because we have nothing else, because everything is our own doing. It's our own problem, and we continue to pay the price. It's another reason that Hegseth should be fired. He has been a disaster. This has been the worst run war of recent memory, and there is just no way we're going to get around that, and Republicans are going to pay that price.
It occurs to me that the Trump administration acts like the world is ending tomorrow, because their whole approach to problems like this is, we just need to survive this news cycle. And as long as no one has any follow-up questions tomorrow, we're fine. This is not going to work. I mean, China buys 90% of Iran's oil, right? And he left Chinese refineries and the Chinese banks out of these economic sanctions. So he's not actually pulling the one lever that might induce some kind of action here, because the economic consequences of doing that would be far worse, which shows you that this is just meant to be a very superficial, get us through the next few hours kind of talking point. It's not meant to be an actual policy to put any pressure on Iran, who continues to control the Strait of Hormuz and therefore has the high ground on us economically. They have all the leverage here. So this feels like a PR maneuver that wasn't thought out beyond the next news cycle and sort of doomed to fail.
A year ago, politicians in both parties were treating data centers as economic development. AI, jobs, investments, beating China. Now data centers have become a wedge issue in some of this year's biggest and most closely watched races. A political poll from July found that a large number of Americans have changed their opinion since January, and they're now against the development taking place in their communities. Now, I don't want to talk about the merits of data centers and AI and all that stuff. That's a policy, that's boring. What I want to talk about, though, is the politics of it all, because a lot of politicians have had to make a U-turn on data centers where they were supporting them before, but now they're getting attacked for changing those positions. What's interesting here, Matt, and I'd love to get your take, is we may be watching the birth of a new political issue and nobody owns it yet.
Yeah, this is like a second derivative political issue because the underlying driver here is high prices. It's electricity bills. Remember, people don't think in terms of rates. And every time you hear a politician say like, well, electric rates are up, they haven't been properly media trained. Right. Bills are up. What people care about is bills. And bills are indeed up. I have data in terms of rates, but trust me, national electric rates are up 7.1% in 2025. And it's concentrated in a bunch of states. Pennsylvania, it's up like 18.9%. So the point is people are facing high bills. And this has become the easiest shorthand on what is an immensely complex issue. So from a political standpoint, the easiest simplification is to find a high-profile villain, and that's essentially what's happening here. I'm not saying that data centers are good or bad or anything. I'm just saying that's what's happening politically, and you can see it both parties. Sherrod Brown's gone after John Husted as being, quote, the face of data centers. Greg Abbott, who once called Texas, like less than a year ago, the epicenter of AI development, is now pushing for restrictions. Trump seems to be the only one who hasn't gotten the memo. He's like, oh, they throw off all kinds of jobs and they're great. Love data centers. That we're really in anyway, and so that's really what it's become. Is this is just a simple shorthand for politicians to be able to say, I hear you on your electric bills and I'm doing something about it.
I think that's why you see that issue really going. We're always looking for that villain, and I think this gives it to us. What I find interesting is it's not a partisan issue right now, and so it really is a both sides using it. And from a strategist, that to me is fascinating because you don't see many issues that both sides can claim as a villain and try to drive that wedge right now.
There was a major legal settlement that happened on Wednesday. Meta, the owner of Facebook, settled with 47 states, DC and the U.S. territories, who had filed suit over claims that its platforms addicted and harmed children. They're going to pay to the tune of $17.1 billion, plus a separate roughly $1 billion settlement with Texas. This ends a bellwether federal trial in Oakland before all kinds of testimony and depositions were allowed to be heard. Meta stock rose 1.3% on the news. So that gives you some indication of who won here. But how do you think this is going to play out politically? It's an odd situation where you've got Ken Paxton and Rob Bonta of California on the same side of the same case. Where does this issue go from here politically?
What's interesting about this issue, the fundamental premise is that they use their algorithms for addiction. I've seen a lot of people talk about this as it's same as big tobacco. It's the same kind of settlement. I think long-term, the bigger conversation is how this impacts us politically gets to be how we're being fed this information. What does Meta and these companies now start to do that they're going to start changing how this information is delivered? Or are they just going to double down Have they just spent the money and said, you know what, we've done our good deed, but now we're going to target adults even more and we're going to make it hyper addictive? And that's where the political component comes in, because it allows us to continue to push those narratives on social media and get people all amped up on issues that we could not do before. Social media has provided us the greatest, biggest opportunity to excite and incite you in a way that you don't even know is coming. Direct mail, television ads, those did not work as well as what those ads can do on social media. And I think it'll be interesting to see the political fallout of this and how that ramification hits us later in politics.
It's interesting that once again, we're trying to deal with substantive policy issues through the courts, not by legislating, not by passing laws, not by having inquiries through hearings. That's what the Congress is supposed to do. That's what our duly elected representatives are supposed to do. Instead, we're leaving it to a legal settlement where, make no mistake, Meta settled here because they didn't want the discovery. They didn't want all the documents to get revealed. They didn't want the question to be, what did they know and when did they know it? Now, consumers got something out of this. There are going to be changes that apply to U.S. teen users, to our daily caps on Instagram and Facebook, interrupting the infinite scroll, no use between midnight and 6 a.m., notification silence between 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. Mark Zuckerberg needs to undergo a public caning. I made one of those up. But fundamentally, again, and you can see this in the stock rise, sure, it's a win for Facebook, but it's a slight win for consumers. And once again, we're looking for the courts to settle something that really the Congress should have taken care of. It's about time for our look at the fight for the Congress and the rest of the election action going on in this week's edition of The Battlefield.
The polls are shifting. The map is changing. The fight for Congress is on. This is The Battlefield.
We have to do an abbreviated, I'll call it a highly efficient, focused edition of The Battlefield this week. Normally we do 3 things you've noticed, 3 things I noticed, but let's condense it down to one big thing for each of us.
The biggest observation for this week really for me came in 2 parts. One, the Republican convention that's coming up in early September. It was announced what the 2 days are going to look like. It's 109 items and speakers, whatever that means. Trump is speaking both nights. But what is the most important piece of that, and it ties directly into my second one, which is MAGA Inc., is this convention is going to make this election about Trump. And there was a story out this week in the Atlantic that Trump gathered all his political advisors in the Oval Office to discuss how he's going to spend this $400 million. And what he decided was that he is going to run ads on his record. He is going to make the election all about himself. And so he's going to spend all these money in individual House and Senate contests, not promoting the candidates, not promoting issues that are going to motivate voters, but talk about why he is good and why, as president, he has accomplished what he wants to.
As the noted philosopher Montgomery Burns once said, excellent. I couldn't be more thrilled that Donald Trump is going to make the election all about himself and run ads that are self-serving and promoting how great he is. This really connects to some of the numbers that we've seen this week. But suffice it to say, with a political figure as notable as he is and who's as far underwater, who's actually detested as much as he is, please associate the Republican Party with you as much as you can. Should we do the numbers?
Yeah, let's run into the numbers. Let's see what you're seeing.
All right. So on the scoreboard this week, you know what, Matt? I'm going to lift your spirits a little bit because things were drifting your way once again for a second straight week. A slight improvement in Trump's net approval rating, actually 3.5 points, which is not bad in his net approval rating with independent voters. Of course, he's still negative 40.9, but again, better is better. The generic ballot by 2 different measures, a couple of tenths of percentage points down in terms of the Democratic Party advantage, flat on consumer sentiment, a little bit of an increase in gas prices, but nothing that's really going to drive political opinions. Now, we did see in the past week a number of changes in race ratings from major campaign analysts, including Charlie Cook, a move of 3 House seats toward the Democrats, 2 Senate seats into toss-up status, again, toward the Democrats, and 2 governor's races toward the Democrats. No change in prediction markets. So that may lead to the natural question for you that I can already anticipate you having. What does this mean in terms of a verdict if you've got structural indicators going one way and race ratings changes going the other way? Would you like to know?
I would love to know.
Mazel tov, Matt, because to me, this is another week that is a slight win for Republicans because structural indicators are current. That's what we're seeing in the freshest, newest numbers. Race ratings changes are a little bit of a lagging indicator. They're based on an accretion of data that happens over the course of several weeks. So you and I have already talked about some of the polling numbers that we'd seen in places like Iowa and Texas, where those Senate races got moved into toss-up status, got moved toward the Democrats. We've been seeing those numbers for weeks and weeks now. What these folks like the Cook Political Report are doing is they're taking those figures and other indications, other data points, they're putting them all together, and they're really making sure they're confident about a trend before they make a change in the race ratings. And so you see something like that, and what it means is, yeah, we're dealing with numbers that are at this point a couple of weeks old. It's a very important and powerful signal. But in terms of what's happened in the last 7 days, it's been an advantage for Republicans. How do you see it?
I think we're definitely trending slowly in that direction. The numbers are starting to show some good news. I think what's going to be really interesting is Labor Day is the kickoff to campaigns. We're going to start to see what that really looks like when voters are done with vacation and they want to start paying attention again and start making those decisions. I think this MAGA Inc. spend of $400 million, I don't think it's going to go as well as we think it's going to go, but some spend is better than nothing, and we'll push back a little bit on the Democratic messaging. The fundamental problem is the trade war. That is going to create real issues for us. It's going to increase our costs. If that continues and the Iran war continues, groceries are going to be too expensive, and it's going to be a problem. So let's hope that's not what happens, and let's hope that Republicans keep turning forward and make this thing competitive.
Oh, I think that Trump's spending is going to go as well as I think it's going to go. I feel very confident about my opinion about that. But look, speaking of things to hope for, let's get to this week's Dose of Hope.
A woman in San Francisco hired a humanoid robot to clean her apartment for $30. And the internet completely lost its mind. It made her bed, cleaned her bathroom, and vacuumed. Now, there's one catch here. There is still a human involved. An employee remotely controlled the robot through its cameras. It was slower than a human, but it actually did a solid job.
Videos were given to us by Tau Robotics. This one is sped up and shows the robot getting out of a minivan before a cleaning job, vacuuming and cleaning up a home.
That's right. It gets unloaded from a minivan like somebody's weird cousin just showed up to help you move, and it's wearing clothes, actual clothes, a shirt, pants, which immediately became one of the biggest questions online. Why does the robot need pants? Because then it walks in the apartment and gets to work. And at that point, America apparently remembered every robot movie we have made for the last 40 years. The comments immediately became Terminator, Skynet, iRobot. Will Smith tried to warn us. Basically, half the internet thinks this is the beginning of the robot apocalypse. The other half is still trying to figure out who dressed it. We've all seen the videos of humanoid robots. We know that technology exists. But watching one climb out of a van dressed like a guy from Best Buy and walk into somebody's house feels completely different. We spent decades imagining killer robots marching through burning cities, but apparently Skynet begins with light housework. So congratulations, robots. You have officially arrived. America is impressed. America's terrified. And America would really like an explanation for the pants.
Look, if no pants is good enough for Winnie the Pooh, it's good enough for the robots. On a somber note, Dolly Parton died this past week after a short battle with cancer. Donald Trump ordered flags at federal buildings lowered to half staff through September 1st, which is a pretty notable federal recognition for someone who is ultimately a country singer. She was the last person in American public life that everyone agreed on. And you can tell because there's actually polling on her. That's right. There's polling on her as if she were running for something. She earned from UMass Lowell in March 2026 a 70% favorable rating. Now, you can compare that to a figure like Barack Obama, who is plus 14, George W. Bush plus 5, Taylor Swift plus 3, Donald Trump minus 18. The fact that you get tributes from across the political spectrum, from Trump saying it was like losing a member of the family, to former President Joe Biden, who called her an American original, and figures like Bernie Sanders and Zohran Mamdani, says a lot about how much she hit all of the quadrants of American life. She first appeared on the Grand Ole Opry stage at age 13. She had a 7-decade career, 10 Grammys, the Country Music Hall of Fame, the Songwriters Hall of Fame. She wrote her own material, Jolene, My Tennessee Mountain Home, 9 to 5, I Will Always Love You. And by the way, her original of that song is way better than Whitney Houston's. Just saying. Sorry, Whitney. Love you too. And by the way, Whitney Houston's version sold 25 million copies, the best-selling single ever by a female artist. She also founded Dollywood in 1986, a major county employer locally, estimated to be worth about $650 million. But beyond that, she founded Imagination Library because her father couldn't read. It gives a free book every month to any child from birth to kindergarten and has distributed 332 million books. She's given $12.5 million to families who lost homes in the 2016 Smoky Mountain wildfires, $1 million to Vanderbilt for the research behind the Moderna COVID vaccine. That's right. She helped fund the vaccine, and she earned the Carnegie Medal of Philanthropy in 2020. And the most notable thing is the way she handled politics. She had positions. She supported Black Lives Matter and LGBTQ people publicly, even though she hailed from deep red East Tennessee. She turned down the Presidential Medal of Freedom twice under President Trump and hesitated to take it under Joe Biden. She said, if I take it, I'll be doing politics. The point is, she could transcend politics while doing political things and be celebrated around the world as an American original and help us all feel like one coat of many colors, which is a dose of hope for me, because if she could rise above politics, so can we all. So rest in peace, Dolly Parton. And on that, for Matt, I'm Matt. We'll see you next time.